Welcome to Not Going Quietly, the podcast where we inspire growth, beat down biases, and get into all sorts of good trouble, with co-hosts Jonathan Beal and Britt East.
No topic is off limits as we explore ways to help everyone leap into life with a greater sense of clarity, passion, purpose, and joy.
So get ready to join us for some courageous conversation, because Not Going Quietly starts right now. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Not Going Quietly. This is our podcast for all of the outraged optimists out there and heartbroken healers who are looking to have courageous conversations on all the topics that none of us, frankly, want to discuss. My name is Britt East, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Jonathan Beal.
Hello. That was a great intro.
I'm really good at this. Jonathan is coming to us from the UK, and I am on the other side of the world in sunny Seattle, which is a big lie because it's always raining here. But there you go. Jonathan, what's
Much
it like
the
in
UK?
Yeah, exactly. We always joke that we have kind of, even though we're on opposite sides of the world, we have identical weather patterns. So, it's raining and drizzly and gray in both areas. Even though it's August, it's already fall. So today we're going to talk about something that neither of us want to discuss because that's what we're here for. That's why we're doing this show. And the topic for today is owning our own biases. And it's such a tough topic because not only do none of us want to admit that we have biases, but a lot of us have stayed maybe purposely fuzzy, maybe engaged in some willful ignorance around the terms and definitions, whether it's preference or prejudice or discrimination or bias or bigotry, because it keeps us where we are. It keeps us safe to not have to think about it. And we're all tired, we're all busy, we have a pandemic going on. I mean, there's any number of reasons and excuses why we might not delve into this work, but it does keep us where we are, and not increasing our understanding of these terms and these concepts and then applying it to our lives, of course, is also not going to help us reorient our culture to one of love, kindness, compassion, and equity, not to mention justice. So I think it's really important that we delve into these, and we all have them. So we're not delving into it with any moral judgments about each other or you, the audience, or ourselves. But the point is that by observing our own thought patterns, habitual patterns of behavior, we can then do better. We can release some of these negative patterns of love and learn how to, lift each other up. One thing that I have noticed in my life, and I think is true for most of us, is left unattended, these patterns of behavior do not heal themselves. In this regard, time does not heal all wounds. And so it's really important to delve in and think through our own patterns of behavior on this so that we can love each other a little better. I don't know, Jonathan, what do you think about that? Did I get any of that crazy or wrong?
No, I think you got that pretty much spot on. One of the things that I really want to delve into today is my past around that, and from a place of recognizing that we can be conditioned into believing certain things and be conditioned into seeing the world a particular way by the information that we're fed on a regular basis, and that from that place there is capacity to change and to learn and to grow and to, as you said, reorient. So yeah, no, I think I very rarely have to add anything to anything you say, Britt. You pretty much cover all bases.
Well, I'm going to say something really controversial now.
Okay.
And I know it's going to tick a lot of people off. I've been thinking about this a long time, and you can tell me if I'm full of beans, but this is where my heart is today. And I'm going to speak through my lived experience, not the lived experience of others, is that as an example, along the lines of what Jonathan was sharing, is that I believe there are no homophobic people. There are only homophobic choices. And I think what that nuance allows us to do is to simultaneously hold each other and ourselves more accountable to our choices, our actions, our words, our behavior, and creates the space for grace, the room for redemption that we all need to actually make sustainable change. So, in a society steeped in straight supremacy, even gay people make homophobic choices from time to time. So, of course, everybody else does. And that doesn't mean when I make a homophobic choice, I, as a queer person, that doesn't make me a homophobe, I don't believe. That means my choice, my action, my word was homophobic. And so all I have to do then is change that choice, observe it, recognize the impact, maybe make amends, depending upon the fallout of that choice, and then change it. And it just seems so much, for me, it just seems so much simpler rather than labeling an entire complex life as one thing or another. It's just identifying a choice, a word, an action, or a behavior. And so I just think it becomes easier to change. And so whether it's bias or bigotry or preference or prejudice or discrimination, to me, these are all actions. These are all choices that we make. So we as adults with varying degrees of agency, we are responsible for our choices. And I just think that once we claim that power and recognize that it's on us to make the changes, then it liberates us to actually do it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree, and the challenge in there is that people don't want to look at their thoughts. People don't want to see the reasons behind why they think the way they do, or behave the way they do, or make the choices that they do, and so the challenge there is always going to be, yes, it's on the face of things simple to make different choices and to choose different thoughts. But the reality of that is that what you're dealing with is programming. And I'm not saying necessarily that it's nefarious programming, but we all contain a level of pre-programmed behaviors, actions, thoughts, choices, whatever. And it's like rewriting a program from scratch on a computer, right? Like if you wanted to recreate a program or change or recreate something, but to do a different behavior, you're talking about serious amounts of work and effort to do that. And it's not really any different to in the human mind. What's really interesting about today's podcast is that last week I was the optimist.
I was just thinking this.
And this week I'm the pessimist.
I was just thinking this.
So that's fun. And like one of my beliefs, naively or otherwise, is that we are all redeemable and we all are kind and want the best for each other. And so I think if we can cut through the programming into heart space and into the love that we know exists in there, but may be trapped because of programs, then yes, what you are saying is absolutely achievable. Back to our optimist.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that I feel us drifting back to our natural state. So I'm going to go to the pessimist again, because you're exactly right. I don't know what the hell I was saying. You are exactly right that none of this happens in a vacuum. And just because it's simple does not make it easy. Mm-hmm. Whether you believe in epigenetics or not, none of this is happening in a vacuum. We are swimming in this soup of previous cultural choices written down through the generations, thousands and thousands of generations stacked on top of each other. So this change is very challenging and requires a lot of effort and sweat equity. But I think demystifying the concepts and maybe simplifying the concepts makes it easier for people to take that first step rather than just giving up out of the gates and saying, oh, I'm just all this way. I can't help it. I'm just racist. I'm just, that's just how I am. I'm just homophobic. That's just, she's just like that. She's from a different time, a generation. She's just homophobic. No, they're making homophobic choices, and there might be all sorts of reasons why. Because none of it is happening in a vacuum, because they have the family conditioning and the cultural conditioning and everything that you referenced, but they're still on the hook for their choice as an adult.
Yeah, I think the thing that we also can't discount is that most people are looking to protect themselves and their loved ones, and they may falsely or not believe that in behaving the way they are doing exactly that, and that becomes really difficult to address, because when someone really deeply believes that their views and beliefs mean that they are protecting the ones they love, you're going to have a real hard time convincing them otherwise. Especially
if they don't know that's what they're doing. If it's happening subconsciously, and you have to reflect even that. And that's why this stuff comes so slowly writ large in the aggregate. And we see that we still have as far as queer people have come in the past few decades, you see how many challenges we have, not to mention topics of race and misogyny and ableism and other things. So it is definitely challenging. And I guess I don't personally feel optimistic about this, which is no newsflash, but I do feel like I want to say, like, I allow myself to be held hostage by hope. Like, I may not feel optimistic because that's just not the way I am. I'm certainly not naive about it, but I'm clinging to that hope. For me, that hope is a strategy. I don't know, how do you feel about it? It sounds like you feel pretty optimistic that people at their core are kind and want to do good. I'm not there yet. I don't know.
I do. And that might be naive, and it might be overly optimistic. And I'm okay with that, actually, because because one thing that I'm beginning to see, and it's really interesting, because someone mentioned this the other day, and it lodged itself in my brain. Interestingly enough, talking about my vulnerability series on YouTube, and that there were parts of that were quite naive, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that, and that's probably a part of me that's never going to go away, and so I'm always going to naively believe that everyone is good at their core, and I'm not going to change that because I can't give that up. Maybe it's a bias that needs to shift or change, but I don't think that I can, because I can't live in a world where I believe that there are people born into this world evil. I can't believe that there are babies born evil or malevolent. I can't believe that.
Yeah, I don't think that the point of life is to iron out all of our flaws and defects and biases and whatever you want to call them. I think it's helpful to recognize them, and then you can make the choice which to release and shed and which to hold on to. Similarly, I don't really want to get rid of my pessimism. I rather like it. And so that's a bias that is, I think, when recognized and honored, can be delightful. I can be, a delightful grump and a curmudgeon. I don't have to be, I don't have to allow that orientation to consume my life or all of my behavior. It can just be a delightful spin. And I think that part of celebrating our differences is honoring those sides of ourselves that we don't wish to change, and to be honest about that with ourselves and each other. And, when confronted by others, like, gosh, Jonathan, you're so friggin' optimistic. Instead of like, oh yeah, you're right, I should really change that. Maybe that's when you're like, yeah, I am.
Yeah, totally. And I think the point there, and it was kind of sticking in my mind as you were speaking, there, we are interdependent as a species. We can't exist without each other. We can't, right? Yeah, you can go and live on a mountain on your own forever and you'll probably be really miserable, but we're social beings, and it is exactly the combination of different traits and ways of looking at the world that makes life wonderful, and why working together, for instance, on a podcast works really well when you have differing ways of seeing the world, because you're not stuck in an echo chamber. And that's really the point of this, right? Is challenging echo chambers.
Amen to that. Jonathan, what is a bias?
Oh, thanks. A bias is... Oh, you caught me off guard there. I'm going to have to edit this portion out. Hang on. That's like surprise brainstorming. Oh my God.
Know.
Hang on. What's a bias?
Or I can go if you want.
If you would, that would be great.
Yeah.
My brain, as you answered the question, just emptied out. So
that was good. No, I love it, because that's kind of what I want to do with each other and guests, is these little sneak attacks that keep us off balance. Like you're always kind of walking on ice and you'd never know, because otherwise it gets to be kind of rote and stale.
Yes.
Okay, so let me chime in with some definitions, and you can edit, where you see fit. So I think of a bias as a predisposed inclination to one thing over another. All things being equal, I'm generally going to lean to this one instead of that one. And that doesn't necessarily imply discrimination, bigotry, prejudice, etc. There's nuances to each of these words. And so a bias is just, I'm leaning to one thing or another. I could have a bias to apples instead of oranges and not necessarily be aware of why. As opposed to a prejudice where I'm prejudging something. Because Jonathan is wearing this kind of a shirt, I think he must be that way. He must act like that way. I take some small facet or feature of his personality and blow it all out of proportion and make assumptions about him as a person. That's a prejudice. Discrimination is when I mindfully choose, based on a series of features or attributes, one thing over another consistently. And then a preference is when I fully understand and know about two different things, and I just choose one or the other. I'm not making any assumptions. So that was all kind of theoretical. Let's break it down into like real life scenarios that we hear all the time. So a preference might be like, I love dating Asian guys, or I hate dating Asian guys. It's kind of the same thing, and maybe that preference actually drifts into a fetish if ritualized and engaged in over and over and over again. And so I exclude everyone else, or I include everyone else and exclude that racial group in this example. And so what seems so innocuous at first, I have a preference for Asian guys, can quickly become insidious because we do not live in a vacuum, because we have all of this sales and marketing pressure to filter out racial minorities, Asians, in this example, we have all sorts of this legacy of bigotry in the U.S. People may not know that many Asian Americans were put into concentration camps in World War II and were rounded up because they were seen as a threat. So that was a prejudice. Because people were judging based on the color of the skin. They were making all sorts of assumptions about their safety, about their integrity, their loyalty to the U.S. If I'm on a dating app and I start to filter out racial groups, not only am I limiting my access to love, not only am I harming other people because I'm participating in this vicious cycle, I have drifted from preference to prejudice. I have drifted into the realm of discrimination. And so what I see gay men doing all the time is justifying their own participation in bigotry, in this case, white supremacy, out of the seemingly innocuous choice on a little app. It can seem so easy. And in this case, these apps make it so simple to filter out, in some cases, people based on their ethnicity or whatever attribute, height or weight or whatever you want to talk about. And then all of a sudden, unwittingly, potentially, I'm participating in white supremacy in this example, or bigotry in general. Does that make sense? Did I get that right?
Yeah, it does. And just, other than just feeling everything that you were saying, it's so easy for these things to turn insidious without us knowing, and to cause real harm to people because we forgot to take a step to think about what we were doing. And I get that as human beings, we fall into these traps easily because maybe we aren't exposed to enough of the world to gain real perspective. But you do have a choice about whether or not you intentionally make someone feel less than. And that's where I'm going. It's your decision to make something that was originally a preference into something that actively discriminates against people and makes them less than is not okay. And rant over, I think.
It's like you said, it's so easy. If left unattended, these impulses can easily become weaponized. And so what might seem innocuous at first can easily lead us down to this really negative space where we're perpetuating a white supremacy or whatever element of bigotry that it is. And that's why it's so important for all of us to continually take stock, to continually think through our actions over the course of the day, our choices, our words, and ferret out those moments where we could have done better. Not to shame ourselves, because shame is not a change agent, but it's to recognize and release, to honor, to make amends, to apologize, whatever the moment requires, but at least to rise to the moment rather than just sweeping it under the rug because we're tired, because we had a hard day, or just because we don't want to think about it. All those things are true for all of us every day. So if we're going to rise above this, there's really no place to hide. There's really no excuse.
No, there isn't. And, it takes courage. It takes determination. It takes integrity. And doing one bad thing doesn't make you a bad person. Doing multiple bad things doesn't make you a bad person if you are willing to look at what you are doing and address it. And as you were talking, I don't like judging anybody for anything, but there's one area that I can't help myself, and that's when I witness unkindness towards other beings. And I have one rule, and that is, if you are going to be in my world, you are kind to all, no matter where they come from, what their background is, where they were born, any attribute, you have to be kind.
Yeah, there's really no greater wisdom than kindness.
No.
And yet, it's something I really struggle with. I mean, kindness is maybe my core sensitivity, my highest value. But I'm also a fighter. I've been conditioned for combat. As a gay person growing up in 1980s Tennessee, that's in the southeastern part of the U.S., which is stereotypically culturally conservative, and in the 1980s felt like oblivion. I knew it was me against the world, and I'm talking about as a matter of life and death. And it just went from there. And so, as a queer person in the corporate world, I currently have a corporate job, and I think that I fight every day for my position. And I often inadvertently, unconsciously let that get the better of me. So when you were talking, I was thinking about just yesterday, all of the unkind choices that I made. I was going to say in the name of standing tall and taking up space, and that's partially true, but in all honesty, is also habitual thought patterns and behavior patterns, habitual responses to certain, stimuli, habitual impulses, lack of impulse control. One of the things I find myself struggling with is I continuously interrupt people, especially in the corporate world. I take up a lot of space, and I am very forthright and opinionated, and that's in one way I've been rewarded for that, and that's part of my role. In another way, it's really easy to get out of balance and enjoy the dopamine hit from that self-righteousness. And it's, I think each time I catch myself engaging with that, it almost invariably seems to come from a place of fear, and underneath that, meekness and weakness, which is maybe what I fear most in the world. I fear most the meekness of others, the human frailties, because it makes me feel less safe, as if almost I needed them to protect me, as if I were giving all my power over to somebody in a given moment and saying, do with me what you will, as opposed to parenting myself, as opposed to standing tall and as an adult. And so my point here, less important than my psychological underpinnings, is that we all have these impulses. We all have these, it's the tip of the iceberg and everything below the surface. We all have a lot going on in our interior worlds. There's been a multitude of choices that have brought us here, a multitude of influences. And so, I judge people a lot, and I'm not proud of it. I'm unkind a lot, and I'm definitely not proud of that. And each day is a new opportunity to take stock and practice doing something a little differently.
Yeah, it's like the kind thing is by extension also about being kind to yourself, right? Like I understand that it's really easy to get caught up in, well, I did a bad thing, and so I am unkind, or I am not being my best self. And it's unkind to believe that you can be your best self 100% of the time. I was kind of reflecting on my little rant and decided that I don't desire that the people around me are 100% kind 100% of the time. I desire that the people around me have the desire to be kind. Both with others and with themselves, because otherwise we are setting ourselves up to fail.
See, I like that, because you just created more space for human frailty and reality.
Yeah.
I guess what's underneath also, in addition to all that, which I love, what's underneath what I was saying is that I have a bias towards strength. And I recognize that bias is part of the capitalist sales and marketing culture that I live in, as part of being a U.S. citizen and living in this crazy country. So that is one red flag. Whenever you're kind of thinking, is this just a preference or is this a bias? Is this, where am I on the spectrum here? That's one big red flag to me, is, am I participating in the industrial mass marketing capitalist complex? And in this case, I am, and I don't even mean willfully, I mean inadvertently. I have this natural bias towards strength because I felt so weak, especially as a child. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that is one step to healing it. And healing it means I can enrich my life today because I hopefully improve my batting average at refraining from filtering out others who might be courageous enough to expose their tender hearts to me. Through my awareness of my bias, I can hopefully parent myself in the moment, breathe through it, experience it, release it, and then connect with them more fully. So by recognizing that I have a bias to strength, I can explore all sorts of little ways that has played out over the course of my life. Maybe even write a story, maybe write it down, so I can gain more clarity and not kind of conveniently forget it over time, like kind of we all tend to do. And I can kind of have this checklist in my brain, am I engaging in my strength bias? A strength bias can quickly become a masculinity bias based on our cultural norms in the US, at least, around what that word means and how it plays out in gender expression. By recognizing that I have this narrow view of masculinity and this narrow bias towards strength, I can start to broaden the range of my gender expression, both in terms of as a witness and allow others to be more fully who they are, but also in terms of myself. And that creates a wonderful positive feedback loop. The more of myself that I am, the more permission I give others to be all of themselves as well.
I love that. What's really interesting as you were talking is I was noticing some of because you used the word masculinity, I noticed some of my biases there. And one of my biases there is that females are stronger and better than men. So that's interesting, because what I'm doing there is I have decided that men are not worthy. Masculine men are not worthy. Actually, if I'm to really clean up that definition, overly masculine men are not worthy. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because I noticed that we're kind of taking the poles again, like where we were talking about optimism and pessimism in our orientations earlier. We're kind of inhabiting those poles on this discussion of our biases for or against what you might call masculinity. And I know, because I know you, I know that you're aware of all of the cultural dynamics in play at that word and the way that we are rewarded for exhibiting masculine traits regardless of our gender orientation, and we are punished for exhibiting feminine traits regardless of our gender orientation. And there's, we could do an entire episode on the history of that and why that exists. But just by honoring the truth of it, we can start to resist that truth. We can start to resist those forces in our personal lives, which is the first step to starting to combat the systemic forces of misogyny and chauvinism and sexism in our world. Our world is oriented towards straight, white, cis, and especially masculine men, based on whatever cultural norms are at the time. And we can start to resist those forces by first noticing it in ourselves.
There's a couple of things that I want to touch on. The first, because I think it's an important thing to talk about before I talk about the second thing, is the idea of othering. The idea of generalizing a group of people and making them separate from you. And often when making them separate from you, making them the enemy or bad. And I talk about that because I want to dive into one of my old prejudices that I have I think hopefully for the most part entirely let go of. Probably naive of me to say that, but hopefully. And so prior to 2016, I lived my life in a small town in the UK and very rarely ever left it. And I'm not sure if you're aware of what happened in 2016, but the world kind of went batshit crazy and decided to do mass othering to huge groups of people. And in the lead up to that, so a bit of extra background, I decided in 2015 that I was going to travel the world for a year in 2016. And so prior to that, I was immersed in British culture, in British media, in 20 to 25 years of vitriolic media and news around immigrants and European citizens and other countries. And so I left for traveling holding the belief that immigrants were bad, that they were stealing jobs, that they were lazy, that they were taking from us and not giving back. Yeah. And that we had no room for them, that they were a drain on resources. And what I didn't realize in that time was that holding that belief left me no room to see the humans. That it left me no room to be kind. And during my travels throughout 2016, I was exposed to numerous cultures across Asia, India, China, huge portions of Southeast Asia. And so I was exposed to many, many, many cultures who lived very differently to British people. And it was a moment of, it wasn't a moment because it happened over the course of 6 to 10 months. But I was slowly exposed to the realities of colonialism, of race, of poverty, the impacts of war, and I had to change my prejudices. I had to remove my prejudices because I couldn't live. I was basically in cognitive dissonance for a while because once I'd found out the realities of, first and foremost, what British colonialism had done to the world, and how different that was to what we were taught in school, I couldn't reconcile what I was seeing versus what I had been told was real. And what saddens me the most about that is that I'd spent 30 years believing something that was a flat out lie. I spent 30 years believing something that was fed to me as truth when it was just a way to isolate and other and cause hate and mistrust and separation. And I've lost my train of thought, but I will come back to it, I'm sure. And I remember very, very, very specific moments in that year of just deep sadness. In fact, there was one event, I was in Laos, and I was witnessing the effects of the Vietnam War on Laos and what we had done, and what the US had done. And I just bawled my eyes out for hours because I couldn't believe what we were doing to other human beings with hearts and wants and desires and families and communities, and how easily we chose to make them enemies. And not only that, but choose to destroy them.
That is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea about that. That's amazing. I had absolutely no idea. I mean, I knew that you had traveled a bunch, but that's really courageous of you to share, and I really appreciate that. And that's really what this podcast is about, is sharing our tender hearts in a way that can help us feel closer to one another, but to liberate our consciousness. A couple things I want to tease apart in what you said is, firstly, you said that you had to change, which is not the truth, because many people, maybe even most people, don't. And so somehow you chose to change, and maybe, like you said, the cognitive dissonance became too much that you could no longer afford to be who you once were, who you were raised to be, a good little white Englishman. And, maybe for whatever reason, you had a catharsis and you could no longer afford to be that person. But many people don't make that choice. And so I think it's pretty wonderful and beautiful, your story. You had the privilege of traveling. You had the privilege of being able to leave your home and gain an entirely new perspective. And you utilized it. That's what privilege is for. Let me take a segue and talk about privilege, because none of us can set down our privileges. They are conferred on us by society. A privilege is an unearned advantage. I cannot say, okay, I'm tired of all my white privilege, I'm tired of all my male privilege, my able-bodied privilege, whatever it is, and I'm opting out. Life doesn't work that way. All we can do is use them as leverage to lift up others. And that's what you did. And that's what is so beautiful. You, whether you knew it or not, you leveraged your privilege to leave your home, gain this entirely new perspective, and then you allowed it to saturate your soul. And you embodied this new way of being that brought, you to this place that you inhabit today. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it does. It's really interesting, because as you're talking, it's like I am clearly happy that I got the opportunity to confront my prejudices and change them. And I really want to be clear that I never share these things because I feel like it's going to make me feel better, because it doesn't make me feel better about who I was. Like, that is someone I will always carry with me. And knowing that person existed fuels me to continue to confront. And I find it's this really delicate place of being like, I'm not happy about who I was, and yes, I've done the work, and I'm proud of doing the work, and there's part of me that can't be fully proud because I had to go from something to something else that I'm not proud of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think pride is a weird word.
Yes.
And it's a loaded term. And what I think your past experience allows you to do is open your heart more fully to people who reside in that space today, instead of painting them as all one thing or not anything. They're just bigots. They're just racists. They're just they're deplorables, as Hillary Clinton famously said. They've made deplorable choices, but nobody is beyond the power of redemption. And your story is living proof of that. You were redeemed through your choices. and whatever other influences and forces were at work inside of you. You experience that redemption through the work. And because you have not chosen to forget or deny who you once were, you can now use that as a source of inspiration to help others achieve similar catharses and leverage their privilege as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest, what I hadn't realized at the time is, I had pretty good critical thinking skills, but I wasn't applying them to the areas of my life where it mattered. And I think that's the key thing here. It's like human beings are designed to believe something if it's repeated to us enough times. And that's true of absolutely anything. And so what we get to be critical of is what we are being fed on a regular basis. And we get to be critical of the information wholesale, because everyone who's giving you information has an agenda, whether you like it or not. And you, much like we do, we have an agenda. We have an agenda to open minds and hearts and have conversations about tough things. That is our agenda here. And it is no different to anybody else who is giving you or feeding you information. And I just, like, be aware of that and where you choose to believe without gathering more information.
Yeah, as they say in the 12 steps, take what you like and leave the rest.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of stuff out there I hope you will consider that you might not like. But the reality of human nature is that few of us are ever changed in the course of a debate. Change comes slowly, one heart to another, one friend to another, through all that we exhibit, exude, and embody, through all we require and refuse to tolerate, through all of the deal breakers. Change happens one person at a time, which is part of why it's so slow. And then when you fold in the cognitive biases that you mentioned, like otherism, like confirmation bias, it's really easy to see why millions of people in the US are resistant to taking a vaccine that's safer than aspirin. It's easy to see why so many white people in the US hold a variety of prejudices about all people of color. And it's easy to see how much work it's going to take at the individual and the systemic level to even begin to address all that.
Yes. I think in another episode, I would also like to talk about overcoming misogyny, internalized homophobia and biphobia, transphobia, and everything else, because I have either intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, systematically tackled each of those things over the last 10 years or so. And I want to share those processes because I think it's important. That's it, actually. I was going to say more, but no, I just think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I keep coming back to the realities of the moment, of each moment we're all experiencing, and our limited capacities. Maybe you're a parent with a bunch of kids, and maybe some of them are being schooled at home because of the pandemic, or maybe you work several jobs, or maybe you're experiencing an abusive relationship, or you haven't experienced as much education as you deserved, and you're being attuned to these ideas for the very first time. this is lifelong work, and there are no finish lines. The forces against us are so entrenched and are so deeply imbued in our reptilian brains that it is, I believe, a lifelong practice of continuously ferreting out our own biases and prejudices, modifying, noticing, observing our bigoted behaviors and choices, apologizing, making amends, and doing a little bit better the next day. To expect to wake up one day and feel free, and maybe this is just the pessimist in me, but it feels naive and also somehow like self-sabotage. Because it won't happen, it almost feels like an excuse not to do the daily heavy lifting. And so part of this is the kindness and empathy of self-empathy, of recognizing the load that you carry, the sack of rocks you are already carrying on your back. And then just trying each day to take one rock out of that sack and lighten your load a little bit so you can love a little more deeply, experience life a little more fully, and engage in a little more togetherness.
Yeah, I love that. It struck me that one of the keys to doing that is to lead from a place of a desire to understand and not from a place of wanting to give your opinion. Because if we start a conversation with our opinion and we're talking to somebody who has direct experience, we are choosing to be ignorant.
Yeah, I'm the worst at this, by the way. I mean, I've got so many opinions about everything, and it's like I'm so tired of dealing with the silliness of the thoughts and opinions that others carry that I think I tend to lead with a brick wall. And I'm particularly thinking, like, when you're talking of social media, as you know, as I like to call it, anti-social media, where I just kind of post the truth as I see it, and there's really no need to comment or question.
These are facts.
It's just, these are facts. They have been disseminated to you. Consider yourself blessed. I mean, because I'm just so like I keep saying, these forces exist in all of us. And, you know, like you said, it all starts with curiosity, empathy, humility, so that you can create the requisite space to receive the wisdom of others, even if it's presented in a way that's not as pretty as you had hoped, even if it's presented in a way that's a little half-baked. You've created the space and contain the wisdom to see the truth beneath the flaws and the wrinkles and the warts of what somebody might be saying. You can see all that they're not saying, hear all that they're not saying. And, you know, it requires, at least for me, I'm highly sensitive, I'm highly introverted and reclusive. It requires a lot of centering and grounding before I enter the world to experience even moments of that space and clarity and openness, because I meet the world with a sense of closeness habitually. I mean, I meet the world with a closed fist, even because I have conditioned myself to be a fighter over the years and struggled to set down my sword and lay down my shield. And so the idea of being open in front of the world is terrifying. I fear that I lack the capacity. I'm talking on deep levels. I don't necessarily consciously walk around with these thoughts, but as I examine them on deep levels, I fear that openness might consume me and I will be annihilated. And so I instead stand tall, I take up space, I interrupt people, I dominate conversations, I push people out of the way. It's almost like, I think that sports cliche, like the best defense is a good offense kind of a thing. And so I meet the world with my closed fist instead of my open palm.
What's really beautiful about you sharing that is I'm about to share you the opposite. As we do, you and I, Britt, we're often on the opposite ends of things. And as you were talking, I was thinking, yes, like absolutely open up. And then I was like, okay, so I'm just going to reflect upon the sort of person that I am. And one of the things you said is that you fear that you might be annihilated. And I can tell you, as somebody who now allows myself to question everything, who will enter a conversation and leave questioning every belief I have ever held in life, I can tell you that if you don't keep a hold of the groundedness, if you don't center yourself, yes, you will be annihilated. And you will get to a point where you're like, I don't even know who I am anymore, because I haven't got a grasp of anything that I stand for, because I keep talking to people and they keep showing me new things. And I don't know what to believe anymore. And that approach has been absolutely key for me, rebuilding the way that I see the world and creating new lenses with which to see the world through. And the caveat here is that find the middle. Like, you don't have to close yourself off entirely, and you don't have to open yourself up entirely either. Yeah, we're on episode 2, and I'm it's not failing to surprise me the opposites that are showing up. I have to be careful the conversations that I have in case because if I'm on a particular track, if I'm on a particular course and I have a conversation with somebody, I'll have to reconsider everything because they've just told me something new that I hadn't thought about. And let me tell you, that's not all that fun.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And I'm getting better at it. But like, you walking around with your closed fist and ready to fight, like I'm walking, or I'm the blob, just absorbing everything as I roll through the world.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Yeah. So
wow.
The lesson there is, like, we get to do both. Like, we get to do both. We are absolutely allowed to open up, take some things in, and then give ourselves time to adjust, make changes, decide where we want to go next, and then repeat. Or we can stand somewhere in the middle and be like, yeah, okay, is that in alignment with who I want to be? Cool, I'll take that on. No, I don't want that. Like, you get to do those things. And quite clearly, Britt and I are people of extremes.
That's, yeah, definitely true. And, you know, I was thinking that we've also each leveraged our earned and unearned advantages to do the deep work of introspection, to observe and articulate and share these insights about ourselves, our ways of being, our habits, our habitual thoughts and ways of being in the world. And because of that, we have the opportunity in a given moment, meaning moment to moment, to choose to do something different, to choose to have fun and experiment and try something new, not with the aspiration to punish ourselves or to win a gold star or the approval of anybody else, but because it might increase our access to love. And what I have found is when we play with these ways of being, not only can it be fun, but it can surprise us and open doors that lead us to radically different states. Or in your case, maybe close doors to reaffirm what we always knew to be true about ourselves. Yeah. And so I think for the listeners, what I hope for them is that they start this process of personal inquiry, maybe work with a trained professional, coach, therapist, whoever that is in your life, not a friend, not a family member, but somebody with training, education, experience, and boundaries, and most importantly, a lack of an agenda and a distinct lack of ulterior motives, a neutral third party to help you document and note and tease apart these parts of you that might be, limiting your life in ways that are unnecessary, frankly. I don't know, Jonathan, what do you hope that the listener gets out of? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the key is that you have access to safe spaces to explore this stuff. It's challenging things that you believe is not an easy process at all. And if you listen to last week's episode.
Yeah, and your loved ones may not be happy about it.
Yes, depending on where you live in the world, you may have a struggle because you're facing community biases and social constructs and all of that kind of stuff. And so the beauty of living in 2021 is that we have remarkable access to communities and people and ways to connect that are fantastical and technological and wonderful, and you get to use those, right? I think we tend to fear that we're never going to meet people who understand us or who want to be available for us on our journey of rewiring our beliefs or perceptions or prejudices, biases, and everything else, right? And you get to lean into that and make a choice.
As we start to wrap up today, Jonathan, I want to ask you a question. What would you tell your younger self with regards to all that you shared?
The kind version would be, don't believe everything you're told. You have an opportunity to open your eyes. The unkind version would be, stop being such an ignorant prick. Yeah.
And on that note, that could be our tagline for the podcast. Stop being such an ignorant prick. Not going quietly. Stop being such an ignorant prick. Love it.
Maybe that is the kind version. I don't know. Exactly. Sometimes kindness doesn't always look the same as niceness.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So... I do want to chime in and say kindness is different than niceness. Kindness is different than politeness. Kindness can involve pain and anguish. So kind is a powerful word, a powerful medicine. So, maybe we need that to be on a little T-shirt. Stop being such a ignorant prick, or however you post it. That might be a nice. Put that on the Post-it note in the mirror.
Yes.
You know, and for me, I'm going to answer that question for myself. It would be, don't take it all so seriously. Just allow yourself to have a laugh and a chuckle and a giggle, and not everything has to be a fight. It's only life after all, as the saying goes. It's don't have some fun. Allow yourself the pleasure of having some fun. You don't have to. Your job is not to beat down the world.
Yes, as someone who often forgets the fun, yes, I agree.
So, we started this episode by sharing some vulnerable truths about ourselves and what we've experienced. And it occurred to me that kind of goes in line with the name of our podcast, Not Going Quietly. All of us are going. I mean, we are all going to experience death at some point. That's the ultimate going. We will all likely move. Relationships are constantly shifting. We are all constantly changing. So metaphorically, we are all constantly going. But what we commit to doing on this podcast is to not going quietly, we're going to resist the forces that would silence us, whether that's about, social justice and activism and diversity, equity, inclusion, or a wide array of other topics. We're going to ferret out all that we don't want to say as hosts, as co-hosts, but also in our guests, and hopefully speaking on behalf of and with our audiences, and asking the questions and raising the topics that you communicate to us that you want to hear about, so that we can, like I said last episode, the AA cliche is you're only as sick as your secrets. And we're going to ferret out some of those cultural secrets that we'd rather not discuss. So when we say we're not going quietly, that's what we mean. We might be going, we might always be changing, but we're sure as hell not going to go quietly.
Yes.
Anything else to add to today's show, Jonathan? It was a really powerful episode. I was really moved by what you shared, and I really hope that the listeners use it as a chance to question their own assumptions, biases, prejudices, look at their own participation, even inadvertent, in systemic bigotry and racism and misogyny and ableism and all the other isms that exist in the world, so that they too might experience more freedom and create more freedom.
Yes.
On that note, I think we will wrap up. And, I hope everybody, takes a little time to feel the fullness of each moment that you're given, question your assumptions, all that you've been told, like Jonathan says. And until next time, we're not going to go quietly.
We sure not.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Not Going Quietly with co-hosts Jonathan Beal and Britt East.
Thanks so much for joining us on this wild ride as we explore ways to help everyone leap into life with a greater sense of clarity, passion, purpose, and joy.
Check out our show notes for links, additional information, and episodes located on your favorite podcast platform.